Thanksgiving night in Texas should have been about family warmth and gratitude. The Mitchell house smelled of roasted turkey cinnamon pies and fresh bread. Children's laughter carried down the hallway, the football game murmured faintly from the living room, and the dining table glowed under the chandelier set for 20 with polished silver and crystal glasses. But all of that was shattered in one instant when my sister's hand whipped across my face with such force that the sound echoed louder than any cheer. Her manicured palm cracked against my cheek, and the sting burst into fire. My head snapped sideways, and the copper taste of blood hit my tongue as it trickled from my lip onto the pristine white napkin. The room froze. Forks hovered in midair. My cousin's glass of wine trembled in his hand, and in the silence all eyes turned to me, the younger sister who had just been slapped bloody at the Thanksgiving table. Victoria Vicky stood tall beside her chair, chest heaving, slightly lips curled into a satisfied smile. She had prepared for this moment. She wanted to do it where everyone would see, where every relative, every neighbor, even her boss could watch her strip me of dignity. Just seconds before she had lifted her glass to toast. To family, she had said sweetly, and to hard work paying off. Some of us climb the ladder, some of us can't handle the pressure. She had gestured toward me. My little sister Hannah tried the army. Couldn't even last. Now she's basically unemployed, living off pity. Tonight, let's be thankful for knowing what real success looks like. Laughter rippled nervously half-hearted, and I had felt my cheeks burn with shame. Then came the slap, sharp and deliberate. "Maybe now you'll learn some discipline," she sneered, her voice slicing the silence after the strike. The humiliation was total. My parents sat frozen. My father, Robert, stared into his wine glass as though the bottom might hold an escape. My mother, Linda, pressed her lips together so tightly they nearly disappeared, unwilling to scold the daughter she favored. Around the table, cousins shifted uncomfortably. Neighbors tried to avoid my eyes, and a young nephew whispered, "Mom, why is Aunt Vicky hitting Aunt Hannah?" His mother hushed him quickly, but the words hung in the air like smoke. Blood dripped onto my napkin, staining it red against the white cloth of the table. I dabbed it carefully, forcing my hand not to tremble, forcing my spine to stay straight. My heart raced, pounding against my ribs, but my face remained steady. I remembered my grandmother's words only days earlier at her nursing home in San Antonio, quiet strength Hannah. Let them talk. Truth always surfaces. That memory was the anchor keeping me from collapsing under the weight of the moment. My sister thought she had broken me in front of everyone. She thought that slap was the final word, proof that I was weak, that I was less. But what she did not know, what none of them knew, was that her own boss was sitting across the table watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. Jonathan Reyes, CEO of Oracle Austin, the man she had bragged about endlessly, the man she claimed mentored her, was seated at the far end of the table, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. Vicky mistook his silence for approval. She preened, adjusting her dress, basking in the attention. "See?" she said loudly, still standing over me. "Some people just cannot handle responsibility. They crack, they collapse, they run home when life gets hard. But not me. I never back down. That is why I am moving up in the world, why I represent this company better than anyone else at this table." Her words struck deeper than the slap. Each sentence was designed to bury me further, to convince everyone present that I was nothing but failure wrapped in a uniform that no longer mattered. Have you ever been humiliated by your own blood cut down in the very place where you should be safe? That was me in that moment, surrounded by food, laughter, and family. I felt like I was standing alone on a battlefield. I wanted to scream back to remind her of every life I had saved, of the Army Commendation Medal I had earned, of the nights I had carried bleeding soldiers off dusty roads in Afghanistan, while she sat in an air-conditioned office posting hashtags about ambition. But I did not. Training had taught me restraint. Discipline had taught me silence. I would not hand her the victory of seeing me lose control. Instead, I wiped the blood from my mouth and stood straighter. The chandelier light caught the smear on my napkin. My breathing steadied. My eyes did not leave Jonathan Reyes. He leaned back slightly, his gaze locked on Vicky, his jaw set in a way that promised reckoning. No one else noticed it, but I did. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the weight of judgment forming silently, while my sister continued her performance. She believed she was dazzling him. She was blind to the fact that she had just exposed herself more completely than she ever could imagine. The silence stretched. Every second dragged like an eternity. My humiliation pulsed in the air, but beneath it, something else began to rise. A current, a shift, the first whisper of justice. I felt it, though I said nothing. Jonathan Reyes's eyes moved from Vicky's triumphant smirk to my steady posture, my quiet strength, my refusal to collapse. His stare was colder than the November wind outside, and it landed on my sister like a sentence waiting to be spoken. That was the moment the entire night turned. She thought she had won. In reality, she had just written the first line of her own downfall. To understand why that slap at the Thanksgiving table cut so deeply, you need to know who I was before that night and why my sister thought she had the right to call me a failure. My name is Hannah Mitchell. I am 19 years old, and until a few months before that dinner, I was serving as a combat medic in the Army Reserve at Fort Cavazos, formerly known as Fort Hood in Killeen, Texas. I had enlisted straight out of high school, driven by a sense of duty that burned in me since I was a child. Some kids dream of stages or boardrooms. I dreamed of uniforms, of serving something larger than myself, of carrying the kind of responsibility that tests you to the core. Training at Fort Cavazos was not easy. The Texas heat in summer feels like it crawls under your skin, baking you from the inside out. The drills were grueling, the marches endless, and the days blurred into nights of exhaustion. Yet through every mile run, every field exercise, every classroom lecture on triage and trauma response, I found purpose. I learned to steady my hands while others shook. I learned to breathe through chaos, to listen for the smallest pulse when seconds decided whether someone lived or died. Those lessons hardened me, but they also opened me. Because in the Army, especially in combat medic training, you realize quickly that life is fragile, that a human body is not invincible, and that your role is to stand between a soldier and the grave when everything else falls apart. I still remember the first real emergency I faced. It was during a joint training exercise in Louisiana. A soldier collapsed from heat stroke, his skin flushed, his pulse faint. Others panicked. I did not. I dropped to my knees, assessed, and moved fast. Ice packs to the neck and groin fluids, cooling fans. I worked with the calm I had practiced again and again. He lived. Later, my commanding officer told me, "You kept him alive by refusing to panic." That was the moment I knew this was not just a role. It was my calling. So when my sister sneered that I couldn't even last, she erased years of sacrifice and discipline with one sentence. She erased the early mornings when I laced my boots before dawn, the nights I studied emergency medicine by flashlight, the hours I spent carrying packs heavier than my own body weight. She erased the deployment to Afghanistan, where I treated a soldier wounded by shrapnel, my gloves slick with blood, my voice steady as I told him to hold on. He lived too. For that, I was awarded an Army Commendation Medal. That medal was tucked in a small wooden box in my room back home, never flaunted, never posted online, just a quiet reminder of what I had chosen to do with my life. But life has a way of demanding choices that medals cannot shield you from. In the spring of that year, my grandmother, Margaret O'Connor, the woman who had raised me when my parents were too busy or too indifferent, was diagnosed with late-stage heart failure. She was 75, living in a nursing home in San Antonio, and her time was slipping away fast. The doctors spoke in careful tones. Months, maybe. Not years. I could not ignore that. Not after everything she had done for me. She had been the one to bandage my knees when I fell off my bike, the one to press a cold cloth to my forehead, when fever burned, the one to whisper bedtime stories about her childhood in Boston and her parents who had come from Ireland with nothing but hope. She had been my anchor when the house I grew up in was filled with shouting and silence instead of love. So I made the hardest choice of my young life. I stepped away from active training and transferred to reserve status to be near her. I knew the whispers would come. Soldiers do not quit, people would say. Maybe she could not handle it, others would murmur. I did not care. I packed my duffel, signed the paperwork, and drove south to San Antonio, where I could sit by my grandmother's bed and make sure her final months were not spent alone. That was the choice Vicky mocked, the choice she twisted into weakness. She did not understand sacrifice because she had never had to make one. While I was holding the hand of a grandmother fading away, she was holding cocktail glasses at networking events. While I was memorizing medication dosages and vital signs, she was memorizing talking points for her next corporate meeting. And while I was learning to breathe through the screams of soldiers in pain, she was learning to smile through performance reviews. None of that is wrong. But what made it toxic was her constant need to compare to measure her worth by diminishing mine. She did not see my service as noble. She saw it as proof that she was better because she wore heels instead of boots, carried a briefcase instead of a medical kit. What my sister never realized is that the Army had given me something she could never take. It had given me resilience. It had given me composure. It had given me the ability to stand up, bleeding, humiliated, and still hold my ground. That Thanksgiving slap was not the first time I had faced pain, and it would not be the last. But pain never scared me. What scared me was silence, the silence of family who should have defended me, the silence of a mother who would never speak up against her favorite child, the silence of a father too weary or too cowardly to intervene. That silence was heavier than any backpack I carried on a march. So, yes, when the room froze that night, when my sister thought she had destroyed me with her hand, and her words, she did not understand that I had already survived worse. I had survived nights in barracks where loneliness clawed at me. I had survived moments in field hospitals where one wrong move meant a soldier would not go home. I had survived the crushing decision to leave behind the uniform I loved in order to sit beside the bed of the one person who had always loved me unconditionally. If that did not break me nothing she could do would. And yet humiliation is still humiliation. No amount of training erases the sting of being cut down by your own blood. No commendation medal can stop the ache when the people who should stand beside you choose to laugh instead. That is why that slap mattered. That is why the blood on my lip felt heavier than any wound I had tended. Because it was not just flesh that was struck. It was identity. It was sacrifice. It was every choice I had made to live a life defined by service. And that is why when Jonathan Reyes looked across the table with that steady, piercing gaze, I knew something had shifted. My sister had exposed herself, and soon the world would know the difference between image and substance, between arrogance and sacrifice, between her and me. When people ask me what it was like growing up in the Mitchell house, I never know where to begin. On the outside, we looked ordinary. Robert, my father, was a truck driver who spent long weeks on the road hauling freight across Texas and the southern states. Linda, my mother, stayed home cooking casseroles and keeping the house neat. To neighbors, we were a hard-working family in a quiet Leander suburb just north of Austin. But inside those walls, the rules were written by unspoken favoritism, and those rules shaped everything. From as early as I can remember, my sister Victoria was the star. She was 5 years older, tall, confident, and blessed with the kind of beauty people noticed. My mother doted on her as though she were royalty. Every drawing she brought home from school was taped proudly to the refrigerator. Every cheerleading ribbon was displayed in the living room. When she talked back, it was called spirit. When she demanded things, it was ambition. Me, I was the quiet one, the child who slipped under the radar. My report cards with straight A's barely earned a nod. My soccer trophies gathered dust in my room. If I ever raised my voice, I was told to stop being difficult. The double standard was clear, and it cut deeper with every year. The favoritism was not just emotional, it was practical. At the dinner table, Vicky was served first. On birthdays, her gifts were extravagant, while mine were practical. When she wanted new clothes, Mom found the money. When I asked for a new pair of running shoes, I was told to make do with hand-me-downs. My father, when he was home, saw it but rarely challenged it. He believed peace was easier than conflict, even if it meant letting one child carry the weight of silence. I grew up learning that my voice was not worth raising because it would only echo back unheard. But favoritism alone does not create a toxic family. It was what came with it, the constant comparison. Vicky thrived on measuring her worth by diminishing mine. If I brought home an award from school, she would mock it as cute. If I talked about enlisting in the Army, she rolled her eyes and said, "You'll never make it. You're too soft." When I got accepted into a pre-military medical program, she laughed and called me Nurse Barbie. I told myself I did not care that her words could not touch me, but the truth is, they sank in layer by layer until I built walls around myself just to survive living under the same roof. And sometimes it was not just words. One memory stands out so vividly it still burns. I was 9, she was 14. We had been fighting over the TV remote, a stupid sibling squabble. She lost patience, grabbed me by the arm, and shoved me so hard I crashed against the edge of the coffee table. The corner split the skin above my eyebrow. Blood poured down my face as I screamed. My mother rushed in, but instead of scolding Vicky, she scolded me. "Stop making drama, Hannah. It was an accident. You're fine." She pressed a towel to my cut, sent me to my room, and that was the end of it. The scar still faintly marks my forehead today. It is not just a scar of childhood clumsiness. It is a reminder of the moment I learned that in my family, my pain was invisible. Years later, when I stood at that Thanksgiving table with blood on my lip, I realized it was not the first time I had bled while everyone else looked away. It was simply the first time there was someone powerful enough in the room to notice. My father's role in all this was quieter, but just as damaging. He had the kind of authority that could have stopped the favoritism, but he chose absence over confrontation. His job as a truck driver kept him on the road, and when he was home, he wanted peace. He let my mother run the house, and she ran it like Vicky was queen. I once asked him why he never stood up for me. He sighed, rubbed his forehead, and said, "Your mom loves you both in her own way. Don't start fights you can't win, Hannah." That was his creed. Avoid conflict. Keep moving. I hated him for it, because by refusing to fight, he let one child grow cruel and the other grow invisible. The result was predictable. Vicky became entitled, convinced the world owed her admiration. She strutted through high school, then college, always certain that applause should follow her. When she landed her first corporate internship, my parents acted like she had won the lottery. When she became HR director at Oracle Austin at 24, they treated it like the pinnacle of success. I was proud for her at first, until I realized pride was not what she wanted. She wanted comparison. She wanted triumph over me. Every family gathering became her stage to remind everyone of her climb and my supposed fall. When I joined the Army, she sneered. "So you could not handle real work, so you're playing soldier." When I came home on leave still in uniform, she would joke, "At least you look cute in costume." When I left to care for our grandmother, she delivered her final verdict. "You quit. You gave up. Career suicide. No one will ever take you seriously again." She said it with such certainty that even relatives began to nod along, whispering that maybe Hannah had cracked under pressure. It was not just her voice I had to battle. It was the silence of those who should have defended me. My mother always brushed it off. "She doesn't mean it that way." Don't be sensitive. My father retreated to his recliner, eyes glued to the television. Aunts and uncles looked away, unwilling to enter the fray. Each time I learned again that in my family, cruelty carried no consequence. It was only at Thanksgiving with a CEO at the table and video cameras in people's hands that consequence finally walked through the door. The toxic dynamic was not just in how we were treated differently. It was in the gaslighting, the rewriting of reality. When Vicky hurt me, I was told it was an accident. When she mocked me, I was told it was a joke. When she undermined me, I was told it was motivation. And when I finally stood up for myself, I was accused of being ungrateful, dramatic, or disloyal. Living in that constant distortion twists your mind. You start to doubt your own memory, your own strength. You begin to wonder if maybe they are right, if maybe you are the weak one. It took the discipline of the Army, the training that drilled into me the ability to trust my own judgment to break free from that doubt. But freedom is not the same as escape. By the time Thanksgiving came around, I was back in Austin living under their roof again temporarily while I cared for Grandma Margaret. And in that house, the same old patterns replayed. My mother made excuses for Vicky. My father avoided the tension. Vicky sharpened her words like knives, preparing to use them in front of the most important guest she had ever invited into our home, her CEO. She thought humiliating me would raise her higher in his eyes. She thought breaking me publicly would cement her image as the strong sister. She had no idea she was setting fire to her own career. Looking back, it is clear the Thanksgiving disaster was not sudden. It was the inevitable climax of years of favoritism, control, silence, and abuse. It was the moment the scar above my eyebrow, the whispers behind my back, and the cruel laughter at family dinners all converged into one slap that everyone could see. And unlike before this time, the silence that followed would not protect her. The days leading up to Thanksgiving carried a tension I could feel in my bones. It began the Saturday before when I drove down to San Antonio to spend the afternoon with Grandma Margaret. The nursing home smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, the kind of mix that tells you comfort and sickness live side by side. She sat by the window in her wheelchair, the Texas sun spilling across her silver hair. Though her heart was weak, her eyes still held the sharpness of a woman who had lived through wars, recessions, and raising children who did not always turn out the way she hoped. "Hannah," she said softly as I knelt to take her hand. "Thanksgiving is coming. You'll have to sit at that table again." I nodded. "I can handle it, Grandma." Her fingers squeezed mine surprisingly firm. "You don't have to fight to prove anything. Quiet strength always wins." "Let them talk. Truth has a way of coming out." Her words steadied me. I stayed for hours listening to her stories about her own parents who had crossed the ocean from Ireland with nothing but hope and grit. She told me how they endured whispers of being nobodies, how they built dignity not with titles but with endurance. "You come from that blood," she whispered before I left. "Remember it." On Monday, the storm began to build. My sister posted on LinkedIn a platform she treated like her personal stage. In bold letters, she wrote, "Thrilled to be hosting my CEO, Jonathan Reyes, this Thanksgiving. It's an honor to share my family values with the leader who inspires me every day." #gratitude. Leadership. #Oracle proud. The comments rolled in quickly. Congratulations, admiration, envy. She basked in it. And quietly I knew she was already planning to use me as part of that performance. For her family was never about belonging. It was about image. By Wednesday afternoon, I drove the familiar route from Fort Cavazos in Killeen back to Austin. The flat Texas landscape rolled by the November sky, heavy with gray clouds. My uniform jacket lay folded neatly in the passenger seat, though I was not on duty. I wore jeans and a sweater, ordinary clothes that made me blend in, but inside I still carried the discipline of the Army. That discipline was the only reason I could face the house on Willow Creek Drive without turning around. When I pulled into the driveway, the scent of roasted pecans and spices already wafted from the kitchen. Mom stood at the counter, basting pies, her lips pressed into that tight line that told me she was anxious but determined not to show it. Dad was in his recliner watching football highlights as if ignoring what was coming could delay it. And Vicky. She swept into the kitchen in a silk blouse, phone in hand, chattering to a colleague about strategy sessions and leadership pipelines. When she saw me, she smirked. "Well, well, the prodigal sister returns. Try not to embarrass me in front of Jonathan tomorrow." I ignored her jab, setting my bag down quietly. "I'm here for Grandma, that's all." Her laugh was sharp. "Grandma isn't even coming. She's too frail." "Face it, Hannah, you're just tagging along. But don't worry, I'll make sure people know you. Help out where you can." She said it like charity, like my existence was an accessory she would tolerate for one evening. Dinner that night was strained. Every time I answered a question about my plans, Vicky cut in with stories about her promotion, about mentoring programs, about Jonathan Reyes himself. "He's the kind of leader who notices talent," she said loudly, eyes flicking toward me. "He sees who can handle pressure and who can't." My mother nodded approvingly. My father kept chewing. I stared at my plate, counting the hours until the next day. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the sound of clattering pots and pans. Mom was up at dawn, stuffing the turkey, fretting over timing. Dad raked leaves in the yard, more to escape the kitchen chaos than to tidy anything. Relatives began to arrive by 11, carrying dishes of green bean casserole and sweet potatoes topped with marshmallows. Neighbors came too curious to see what it meant for a CEO to spend a holiday in their suburb. The house filled with chatter, laughter, and the buzz of anticipation. By 12:30, Jonathan Reyes arrived. He stepped through the doorway with a bottle of wine in one hand and a box of Cuban cigars in the other, gifts for my father. He was tall, sharp-featured, with a calm presence that made people instinctively lower their voices. My sister rushed forward, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor, and greeted him as though she were welcoming royalty. "Jonathan, so glad you could join us. Everyone, this is my CEO. He's the reason I've grown so much professionally. I stood near the hallway watching. He shook hands warmly, greeted relatives with easy courtesy, and took his seat at the long table. He glanced at me once, his eyes steady as though he recognized me, though we had never spoken directly. My chest tightened. Did he know my name? Did he know my record? I did not dare to guess. The meal began at 1. Plates were passed, blessings were said, and for a while the clatter of silverware masked the tension. Vicky was in her element, narrating her career highlights between bites of turkey, dropping phrases like talent pipeline and strategic initiatives as though they were seasoning for the meal. She made sure everyone knew she was not just an employee, but someone personally mentored by the man at the head of the table. Every time I opened my mouth, she spoke louder, drowning me out. I sat quietly, my phone on the table beside my plate, FaceTime open for Grandma Margaret, who watched from her nursing home bed. She smiled at me through the screen, her lips pale but her eyes bright. "Hold steady, Hannah," she mouthed, quiet strength. At 2:15, the tension reached its peak. Vicky rose from her chair, lifted her glass, and cleared her throat for a toast. The room hushed. This was her stage, her moment to impress. I braced myself because I knew without doubt that she would not let the moment pass without turning it into a performance at my expense. And I was right. By 1 o'clock, the Mitchell dining room looked like something out of a magazine spread. The long oak table was set with white linen tall candles flickering and plates stacked high with turkey mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes with marshmallows, green beans glistening with butter and cranberry sauce in glass dishes that caught the light. 20 chairs were filled with the voices of relatives mixing with neighbors who had been invited to witness this rare holiday event. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meat, warm bread, and the faint perfume my sister had sprayed too generously. For a moment, if you ignored the undercurrents, it looked like any family Thanksgiving in Texas. Jonathan Reyes, the CEO, my sister idolized, sat near the head of the table beside my father. His calm presence made people lower their voices when he spoke, as though they instinctively recognized authority. He thanked my mother for the food, complimented the pies cooling on the counter, and asked polite questions about the neighborhood. My father puffed up with pride at having such an important guest under his roof. My mother beamed every time Jonathan glanced her way, eager for him to see our family as picture perfect. But perfection is a thin layer that cracks under the slightest pressure, and Vicky, always hungry for a spotlight, began pushing at the cracks before the meal had even settled. She wore a designer dress in a shade of emerald that caught every eye. Around her neck hung a delicate gold chain that she had hinted on Instagram was a gift from her boss, though I suspected she had bought it herself. Every movement she made was calculated, the way she brushed her hair back when she spoke, the way she leaned forward to dominate conversation, the way her laugh rang louder than anyone else's. She was performing, not eating. "Jonathan," she said brightly between bites of turkey, "I was telling my family about the new leadership project you assigned me. It's such an honor to be chosen personally. Not everyone can handle that kind of responsibility." She glanced at me as she said it, her smile tight. My father chuckled. "Our Vicky's always been the ambitious one, from cheerleading captain to HR director in just a few years. We couldn't be prouder." My mother added quickly, "She's always been destined for big things. Always knew how to push herself." The words washed over me like cold water. It was the same script I had heard my entire life, Vicky the star. Vicky the achiever, Vicky the one worth celebrating. I focused on cutting my turkey into tiny squares, trying not to let my face betray anything. Grandma Margaret's face flickered on the iPad propped against a stack of cookbooks near me. She watched quietly from her nursing home bed, too weak to speak for long, but determined to be present. She caught my eye and mouthed again, quiet strength. I nodded faintly. Vicky, sensing the attention drifting, leaned back in her chair. "Of course not everyone is cut out for corporate life," she announced to the group. "Some people burn out or make excuses or, well, just can't keep up." Her eyes locked on me. My cousin James shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Patricia cleared her throat. Jonathan Reyes sipped his wine without comment. I said nothing. Silence has a way of unnerving people, but in my family, silence usually meant surrender. Vicky interpreted it as weakness. "Like Hannah here?" She continued, her tone feigned sweet but sharpened with malice. She joined the army, lasted what, a year, and then quit. Now she just helps out with Grandma. It's nice, really. Everyone needs a hobby. The table tensed. Several relatives exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. My father stabbed his fork into his potatoes. My mother kept smiling as though pretending not to notice the cruelty. I steadied my breath, refusing to rise to the bait. If there is one thing the Army taught me, it is that reaction is control handed away. I pressed the napkin to my lip, though no wound marked it yet. Jonathan Reyes leaned slightly forward. "And what about you, Hannah? What are you focusing on now?" His voice was calm, genuinely curious, but I felt the trap. Answer, and my sister would twist it. Refuse, and she would mock me for hiding. "I'm in transition," I said carefully. "Spending time with family, supporting where I can." Vicky laughed, the sound sharp like breaking glass. "That's a nice way of saying unemployed, but I suppose not everyone can handle pressure. Some people peak early." Her words sliced the air. A neighbor whispered something to his wife. One of my cousins muttered, "Vicky, that's enough," but she ignored him. She had an audience and she would not waste it. The meal continued, but the taste of food turned to ash in my mouth. Every time I tried to speak, she spoke louder. When my uncle asked about my military service, she cut in. She didn't see much. Basic training some time away, but nothing serious. When my aunt asked how Grandma was doing, she turned it into a story about how hard it was for her to juggle visiting while managing her leadership role. It was relentless. Each remark chipped away at my dignity, and my parents' silence was deafening. They had always enabled her, but this was worse. This was public. And yet they sat complicit, smiling at Jonathan Reyes, as if to say, "See, look at our successful daughter." I kept glancing at the iPad. Grandma's face was pale, her breathing shallow, but her eyes never left me. She shook her head once slowly, her expression filled with sorrow, but also pride. She saw me holding my ground, refusing to be baited. That was my only comfort. By 2:15, dessert was cleared, coffee poured, and the tension in the room was taut as a wire. Vicky rose to her feet, glass in hand, the candles reflecting in her eyes. "I'd like to make a toast," she declared. Her voice carried across the table, commanding silence. All conversation hushed. Every fork was set down. Even the children quieted. She smiled broadly, basking in the attention. "To family," she began, "and to success. Some of us have learned that hard work and dedication pay off. Some of us," she paused dramatically, letting her eyes drift toward me. "Well, some of us just don't have the stamina. And that's okay. We can still love them even if they're less." Gasps rippled softly through the group. My cousin looked horrified. Aunt Patricia pressed a hand to her mouth. Jonathan Reyes's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. Vicky lifted her glass higher. "To the ones who rise and to the ones who serve as cautionary tales. May we always know the difference." The silence that followed was heavier than any speech. My pulse thundered in my ears. I knew what was coming next, though I could not yet imagine how brutal it would feel. She had built her stage. Now she would strike the final blow. The room was silent after Vicky's toast, the kind of silence that feels alive, pressing into your skin, filling your lungs until it hurts to breathe. 20 people sat frozen at the table. Coffee cups suspended halfway to lips, dessert forks abandoned on plates, children staring with wide eyes. Even the candles seemed to flicker more sharply, their flames trembling as though they too knew something ugly was about to happen. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, napkin clenched tightly between my fingers, forcing myself to remain still. I could feel the heat crawling up my neck, the burn of humiliation searing my face even before the real blow landed. I had endured my sister's cruelty before, in smaller doses in private spaces where no one dared call her out. But this was different. This was a public execution of dignity staged for the very people whose opinions she wanted to manipulate. She let the silence stretch, savoring it, her glass still raised. "Come on, Hannah," she said suddenly, her voice syrupy sweet. "Say something. Tell everyone what you've been doing since leaving the Army. Share your accomplishments." Her eyes gleamed, daring me to take the bait. I opened my mouth, the words forming carefully, "I've been caring for Grandma," but she cut me off with a laugh that rang out like shattering glass. Caring for Grandma? Isn't that adorable? Playing nurse at home while the rest of us carry real responsibilities. That's not a career, Hannah. That's an excuse. Laughter, weak and uncomfortable, trickled from a few relatives who didn't know how else to react. My stomach clenched. I caught sight of Grandma's face on the iPad screen, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes wet. I wanted to defend myself, to stand up and shout that my service, my sacrifice, my medals meant more than any HR promotion, but the words lodged in my throat. Vicky leaned closer, her voice dropping low, but still loud enough for the table to hear. "Tell them, Hannah. Tell them how you cracked under pressure. Tell them how you couldn't hack it. Everyone already suspects." I gripped the napkin tighter. My chest rose and fell with steady breaths, training, holding me together even as my insides shook. I would not give her my voice. I would not let her see me break. That refusal enraged her. I saw it in her eyes, the flicker of frustration that her words had not pierced deeply enough. She wanted more than silence. She wanted submission. And when silence held, she chose violence. She stepped around the table with deliberate grace, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, every guest's gaze following her movement. She stopped beside me, looming over my chair. "Look at me when I talk to you," she hissed. Slowly, I lifted my eyes to hers. Her face was painted with triumph, her lips curved in a cruel smile, and then, without hesitation, her hand arced through the air. The slap landed with a crack that silenced even the children's nervous shuffling. Pain exploded across my cheek, sharp and blinding. My head snapped to the side, and the metallic tang of blood filled my mouth as my lips split against my teeth. Gasps erupted around the table. A glass tipped over, spilling wine across the linen. My nephew whimpered. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The only sound was my own ragged breath. Blood trickled down from my lip, staining the napkin I pressed shakily against it. My vision blurred at the edges, but I held myself upright, refusing to fall, refusing to give her that satisfaction. The silence broke in murmurs. "Oh my God, did she just— Someone record this!" Phones lifted discreet at first, then openly as guests realized what they were witnessing. Vicky, flushed with adrenaline and power, turned back to the group. "See, this is what I mean. Weak, fragile. She can't even stand up for herself. This is who she is." She looked around the table, seeking approval, expecting nods, expecting laughter. Instead, she found uneasy stares and the glow of recording screens. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. My mother's hand fluttered toward Vicky's arm, then fell back to her lap. Neither of them spoke. Their silence screamed louder than words. I sat still, blood soaking into the napkin, my pulse hammering in my ears. Humiliation wrapped itself around me like a shroud, but beneath it burned something steadier. Discipline, resolve, quiet strength. My grandmother's words echoed through the roar in my head. Let them talk. Truth always surfaces. Vicky mistook my silence for defeat. She straightened, smoothing her dress, her voice rising. "This is the truth about my sister. She is nothing. She is unemployed. She is weak. And she is the cautionary tale we should all avoid becoming." She looked directly at Jonathan Reyes, then smiling brightly as though she had proven her point. "This is why I admire you, Jonathan. You represent strength, success, focus. Not distraction." She gestured dismissively toward me, her voice ringing with scorn. The audacity took my breath away. She had just slapped her own sister bloody in front of 24 witnesses, and she expected her CEO to applaud. Jonathan Reyes did not applaud. He did not smile. He did not move at first. He simply set down his glass of wine, folded his hands together, and fixed Vicky with a stare so cold the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. But still, she didn't see it. She was drunk on her own performance, convinced she had won. She leaned closer to him, lowering her voice as though sharing a confidence. "You understand, don't you? Some people just can't handle the real world." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause could have been. I dabbed at my lip, steadying my breath, and lifted my chin. The humiliation was raw, the sting of her hand still burning across my skin, but deep inside I felt the tide shifting. For the first time, it wasn't just me against her. There was someone else in the room who had seen the truth, who had the power to turn her cruelty into consequence. My eyes met Jonathan Reyes's, and in that moment I understood. The performance was over. Vicky had written her own downfall with every word, every gesture, every strike. The silence was about to break. The silence after my sister's slap felt endless, broken only by the muffled clink of someone's spoon dropping into a coffee cup. My cheek throbbed, blood still seeping onto the crumpled napkin I held tight against my lip. Across the table, guests shifted uneasily, their faces pale with discomfort, some staring at me with sympathy, others at Vicky with disbelief. It was as if everyone had been jolted awake from a dream, forced to confront the truth of who she really was. And then, Jonathan Reyes moved. It was not dramatic at first. He did not leap up or shout. He simply set his wine glass carefully on the linen, the faint sound of crystal on fabric drawing more attention than any raised voice could have. His eyes locked on Vicky, dark and unreadable, his jaw tight. For a man known for measured leadership, the weight of his gaze was louder than thunder. "Victoria," he said quietly. The sound of her name from his lips sliced through the murmurs. She straightened instantly, shoulders back as though expecting praise. She even smiled, the corners of her mouth twitching upward, desperate for approval. "Yes, Jonathan," she said brightly, as though nothing unusual had happened. He tilted his head slightly. "Did I see what I think I just saw?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Vicky's smile faltered. "It was nothing. Just sisters being sisters. Hannah is sensitive, you know. She always makes things bigger than they are." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Sensitive." He leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. "You just physically struck your own sister at a Thanksgiving dinner in front of your family and neighbors. And you expect me to consider that nothing?" A gasp rose from Aunt Patricia. My cousin James muttered, finally under his breath. Phones that had been recording angled more directly guests, realizing they were witnessing something far more explosive than a family squabble. Vicky flushed, her confidence cracking. "She provoked me. She's been trying to undermine me all evening. I couldn't let her embarrass me in front of you." Jonathan's voice remained calm, but each word carried the edge of steel. "Embarrass you. Victoria, what I saw was not Hannah undermining you. What I saw was you humiliating and assaulting your sister and Army medic while representing yourself as a leader at Oracle. Do you understand the gravity of that?" The color drained from her face. For the first time, she seemed to grasp the danger of what she had done. She stammered, "I didn't mean it was just..." But Jonathan wasn't finished. He turned his gaze to me, and the shift in the room was palpable. His eyes softened, his tone changed. "Hannah Mitchell," he said, as though introducing me formally to everyone present. "Army Reserve, Fort Cavazos, Commendation Medal for saving a wounded soldier in Afghanistan. Stepped away from service to care for your grandmother when doctors said she had months to live." The room erupted in murmurs. Heads swiveled toward me, eyes wide, whispers of commendation medal, and "she saved a soldier" buzzing across the table. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's shoulders slumped as though the truth weighed heavily on him. Jonathan continued his gaze, never leaving me. "I know who you are, Hannah. I know because Oracle partners with veteran programs across Texas, and your name came across my desk. I've seen your record. I've read the commendations written by your commanding officers. They describe you as disciplined, composed under fire, and willing to sacrifice for others." Vicky's mouth fell open. You knew." Jonathan turned back to her, his eyes hardening again. "Of course I knew. Do you really think I would come into a family home without knowing who I might meet? You've been so eager to parade your family to me, but you had no idea your own sister's reputation preceded her. That is telling, Victoria. Very telling." Gasps rippled again. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God, he knew all along." I sat frozen, my heart pounding, blood still trickling slowly from my lip, but inside something shifted. The humiliation of moments earlier began to dissolve, replaced by something steadier. Validation. Someone had finally spoken aloud what I had endured silently. Jonathan straightened in his chair, his presence commanding the entire room. "Let me make this clear," he said, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man used to boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. "What I witnessed tonight is unacceptable. As HR director at Oracle, you are entrusted with representing our values. Those values do not include belittling, humiliating, and striking family members. If you treat your own sister this way, what does that say about how you treat our employees?" Vicky's lips trembled. She looked around desperately seeking an ally, but found only downcast eyes. Even my mother, usually quick to defend her, sat in silence, pale and shaken. Jonathan leaned back slightly, his voice dropping but no less powerful. "This is not the place for formal action, but come Monday morning there will be a formal investigation into your conduct. Witnesses will be contacted, videos will be reviewed, and let me be clear, the outcome is already obvious. You've crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed." The room went utterly silent. Even the children understood the weight of his words. Vicky's face crumpled. "Jonathan, please, you can't do this here. This is family. This is—" He cut her off, his tone final. "No, Victoria. You did this here. You chose this stage. You created this moment. And now you must face the consequences." My chest swelled with something I hadn't felt in years. Not revenge, not triumph, but relief. For the first time, someone with authority had not only seen the truth, but spoken it aloud. The humiliation that had burned across my skin moments earlier began to transform into something else. Justice. Jonathan glanced back at me once more, his expression softer, a quiet acknowledgement. He didn't need to say more. The balance had shifted. My sister's performance was over, and the audience had turned. The air inside the Mitchell dining room was so heavy it felt like even the candles struggled to burn. Jonathan Reyes had spoken with the calm of a judge, and his words still lingered, vibrating through the silence. My cheek burned from my sister's slap, my lips still raw, but for the first time all evening, I no longer felt small. Vicky had thought she controlled the narrative, that she could belittle me into silence, but she hadn't counted on the fact that the most powerful man at the table had already written his own judgment. Vicky's voice cracked the silence first. "This isn't fair," she said, her tone shrill, almost desperate. She gestured around the table, searching for allies. "This is family business. You don't understand how we joke. Hannah overreacts to everything. I was just teasing." Her words fell flat. Nobody laughed, nobody nodded. Phones still hovered discreetly in people's hands, red recording dots glowing. A neighbor shook his head, muttering, "Teasing, that was a slap." Jonathan didn't flinch. He folded his hands on the table, his posture as controlled as if he were in a boardroom. "Victoria, I have spent 25 years in leadership, and I've learned something about character. It's not measured when the cameras are on or when promotions are offered. It's measured in moments like this, when you think no one of importance is watching. Tonight, you revealed who you are." Her face twisted. "You can't judge me for one mistake at a family dinner." Jonathan's gaze sharpened. "This isn't one mistake. Multiple employees have already raised concerns about your behavior. I've seen your social media posts belittling people who balance family and work. I've heard reports that you've written up employees, unfairly denied leave to those who needed it, mocked caregivers. Tonight didn't create your downfall, it confirmed it." Murmurs rippled down the table. My cousin James whispered, "She really did that." A neighbor nodded grimly. "He's right. She bragged about it on Facebook." Vicky's hands shook as she clutched her wine glass. "I was pushing for excellence. That's my job as HR director." Jonathan's tone stayed calm, almost surgical. "Pushing for excellence is one thing. Humiliating others, especially your own family, especially a veteran, is another. If you can't show empathy at this table, how can you claim to foster it in the workplace?" Tears welled in her eyes. She turned to my parents. "Mom, Dad, say something. Tell him I'm not like this." My mother's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes darted toward Jonathan, then back at Vicky, before finally dropping to her plate. My father cleared his throat, his voice low. "Vic, you went too far." It was the first time in my life I'd ever heard him say those words to her. The silence that followed was crushing. Vicky's shoulders slumped as if the support she had always counted on had vanished. Jonathan stood then, pushing back his chair. His presence seemed to fill the room, every eye locked on him. "I want everyone here to understand something," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being heard. "Hannah Mitchell is not unemployed. She is not a failure. She is a decorated Army medic who saved lives overseas and chose to step away from service to care for her grandmother in her final months. That is strength. That is sacrifice. That is leadership." Gasps rose from several guests. Phones lifted higher, recording openly now. My heart pounded as I felt a wave of validation wash over me, stronger than any award I had ever received. Jonathan turned back to Vicky, his voice firm. "As for you, Victoria, effective Monday morning, there will be a formal investigation into your conduct. Multiple witnesses here tonight, video evidence already captured, and your own public statements will be reviewed. But let me be clear, the outcome is not in doubt. You have crossed a line that cannot be undone. Prepare to step down." The words hit her harder than any slap could. She staggered slightly, gripping the back of her chair for balance. "You can't do this to me. Not at Thanksgiving. Not in front of everyone." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "You did this to yourself. You chose to make a spectacle of your sister. You chose to weaponize humiliation. I'm simply holding you accountable." Her glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. The sound echoed through the room, sharp and final. My cousin James muttered, "It's over," under his breath. Vicky's tears spilled freely now, streaking her carefully applied makeup. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't ruin me." Jonathan's tone was steady, merciless in its honesty. "You ruined yourself. Actions have consequences, and those consequences don't pause for holidays." The guests began to murmur, voices overlapping, some in sympathy for me, some in disbelief at Vicky's arrogance, others simply astonished at the drama unfolding before them. The Thanksgiving meal that had begun with polite conversation had turned into a public tribunal, and the verdict had been delivered. I dabbed at my lip, the bleeding slowing, and sat straighter. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of silence shift. No longer was silence complicity, it was acknowledgement. My family's refusal to defend me had exposed them as well, but Jonathan's words had filled the void, rewriting the story. Vicky sank into her chair, trembling. My mother reached out as if to comfort her, but Jonathan raised a hand slightly. "No, let her sit with it. She needs to understand." Even my father nodded faintly, his expression grim. Jonathan's gaze swept the table once more. "Leadership is not about power. It is about responsibility. Tonight you've all seen the difference. Remember it." He turned back to me, his expression softening. "Hannah, you showed more composure bleeding at this table than some show in a lifetime of work. That's the kind of character any organization would be lucky to have." The words caught in my chest. I managed only a quiet nod, but inside a flood of emotions surged: gratitude, vindication, and a fierce sense of relief. Phones continued to record, and I knew the story of this night would not remain within these walls. It would spread as stories of justice always do. Vicky sobbed quietly, her once perfect image crumbling in real time. The emerald dress that had sparkled hours earlier now seemed gaudy, her carefully crafted persona stripped bare. The woman who had built her identity on superiority now sat exposed as cruel and small. Jonathan took his seat again, the authority of his presence sealing the matter. "Now," he said calmly, "let's return to what this day should be about: gratitude, family, and truth." But the truth had already been spoken, and nothing would ever be the same again. The shards of Vicky's shattered glass still glittered on the hardwood floor when the room tried and failed to return to normal. The turkey sat half-carved cranberry sauce congealing at the edges of its dish, but no one picked up their fork again. The Thanksgiving meal was over, though the plates remained. What lingered instead was the weight of judgment, the reality that everyone had just witnessed something irreversible. Vicky sat slumped in her chair, mascara streaking down her cheeks, shoulders trembling with uneven breaths. The emerald dress that she had chosen to dazzle now clung to her like a costume too heavy to wear. She looked younger, suddenly, smaller, stripped of the superiority she had wrapped around herself like armor. "Jonathan," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "please, can we talk privately?" "Not here. Not like this." But Jonathan Reyes didn't move. He sipped his coffee calmly as though nothing about her plea could shift his resolve. Victoria, he said evenly, the issue isn't where this happened. The issue is that it happened at all. Privacy doesn't erase behavior. Her lip quivered. I didn't mean— You meant every word, Jonathan interrupted his tone, sharp enough to slice through her excuses. And you meant the slap. You chose cruelty. Tonight it simply caught up with you. My mother's voice, thin and uncertain, entered for the first time. She was under stress, Mr. Reyes. It's been a hard year at work. Maybe we can— Jonathan turned his eyes to her, not unkind but firm. Mrs. Mitchell, if stress leads to violence and humiliation, then leadership is impossible. Your daughter didn't have a lapse. She showed her character. The words silenced even my mother. She pressed her napkin to her lips and lowered her eyes. My father shifted in his seat, finally breaking his own silence. His voice was low-tired. Vicky, I've been on the road most of my life. I thought your mother was handling things here that maybe I didn't see enough. But tonight, I saw everything. And Jonathan's right. You went too far. It was the first time in years that my father had openly contradicted her. Vicky's face crumpled as though the floor had fallen out from under her. Relatives sat stiffly in their seats, avoiding her gaze. Neighbors whispered some, shaking their heads. A guest near the end of the table leaned toward another and said not softly enough, "This is going to be all over town by tomorrow." Phones slipped back into purses and pockets, but everyone knew the recordings were saved. I pressed the napkin against my lip, feeling the sting of the wound, but also the strange calm that followed. Blood dried against the fabric, but my posture stayed straight. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk. Quiet strength, Grandma had told me. It wasn't about shouting. It was about standing tall when others tried to make you small. The iPad screen flickered. Grandma's face appeared paler than usual, but glowing with pride. Her voice was faint, but audible. Truth always comes through, Hannah. You didn't have to say a word. The truth spoke for you. Her presence steadied me. I nodded slightly, my throat too tight to answer. Vicky's sobs grew louder, high-pitched and panicked. This is unfair. You're all turning against me. I worked so hard. I gave everything to that company. I'm the one who carried us into respectability, and now I'm being ruined because of her. She jabbed a trembling finger at me, her voice shrill. Because of Hannah. She's done nothing. Nothing. She quit the army. She hides in nursing homes. She's pathetic. The words hung in the air, desperate and hollow. No one nodded. No one defended her. The silence was worse than anger. It was rejection. Jonathan placed his cup gently on its saucer and stood. The movement drew every eye again. Enough, he said simply. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried finality. You've humiliated yourself enough for one night. Vicky tried to rise, but her knees buckled and she sank back into her chair. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders heaving. The weight of the moment shifted then. Attention turned slowly toward me. Cousin James cleared his throat. Hannah, I didn't realize. About your service. About what you've done. I should have spoken up sooner, a neighbor added softly. We've all seen how much you've done for your grandmother. That's not weakness. That's strength. Even Aunt Patricia, who had often slipped me job listings at family dinners, reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. I see you now. The acknowledgement made my chest ache, not with pain, but with something almost foreign validation. After years of invisibility, the truth was visible, undeniable. My father cleared his throat again. His eyes met mine for a brief second before sliding away, but his words were steady. Hannah, I should have said it a long time ago. I'm proud of you. The words landed awkwardly too late and too thin, but they were words I had never heard from him before. For now, that was enough. The candles sputtered in their holders, wax dripping down in soft rivulets. The Thanksgiving feast sat untouched, but the hunger in the room was no longer for food. It was for resolution, for closure. And everyone knew resolution had already been spoken. Jonathan Reyes turned back to me once more, his voice quieter now, almost personal despite the full room. You've shown more dignity tonight than some leaders show in decades. I hope you remember this moment not for the humiliation, but for the truth revealed. I nodded again, unable to trust my voice, but grateful beyond words. Vicky sobbed quietly, her world unraveling, and I realized something important. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to shout or gloat. Her downfall wasn't my doing, it was hers. And that made the justice all the more satisfying. The iPad flickered again. Grandma smiled faintly. You held steady, Hannah. Quiet strength. That's my girl. I smiled back through the sting in my lip. For the first time in years, I felt whole. The Thanksgiving table never truly recovered after that night. The food went cold, the pie untouched, the once proud centerpiece of autumn leaves and candles drooping in silence. People excused themselves in hushed tones, slipping out the front door murmuring thanks, but avoiding eye contact with Vicky. Even as guests trickled away, the weight of what had happened clung to the house like smoke. I rose slowly, folding the blood-stained napkin in my hand, and excused myself to the bathroom. The mirror reflected a face I barely recognized. Lips split, cheek-swollen eyes, red, not from tears, but from the sheer force of holding myself together. And yet, behind the damage, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Steadiness. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't broken. I had endured. When I returned, Jonathan Reyes had already left. He had shaken my father's hand politely, thanked my mother for the meal, and told me quietly, "Take care of that wound. We'll talk soon." His words echoed as both reassurance and promise. The house emptied slowly until only family remained. My mother busied herself with dishes, her face pale, lips pressed tight. My father sat in silence, staring at the darkened TV screen. Vicky had retreated to her room, the slam of her door reverberating through the house. I excused myself early, driving back to the nursing home in San Antonio to see Grandma. When I entered her room, she was awake, waiting the glow of the iPad still in her lap. I saw everything she whispered, her voice thin but strong with conviction. You stood taller than them all. I sat beside her, holding her hand. It didn't feel like it, Grandma. I felt small, weak. Her eyes met mine, sharp as ever. Quiet strength never looks like fireworks. It looks like you bleeding, but unbowed. Remember that. Her words carried me through the days that followed. By Friday, the video was everywhere. A neighbor had posted it on Facebook, captioning it "Thanksgiving Dinner Gone Wrong." Within hours, it spread to community groups in Austin, then across social media. People debated in the comments, some horrified by the slap, others astonished at Jonathan Reyes's intervention, many praising his defense of a veteran. By Saturday, news outlets picked it up. Oracle HR director humiliates sister at Thanksgiving, CEO responds. My phone buzzed non-stop with messages both from people I hadn't spoken to in years and from strangers offering support. On Monday morning, just as Jonathan had promised, Oracle announced a formal investigation. Witnesses were contacted, videos submitted, and statements collected. The process was professional, clinical, and swift. By Friday, the result was clear. Vicky was terminated for violating company code of conduct, creating a hostile environment, and engaging in behavior unbecoming of leadership. The fallout was immediate. She lost her title, her salary, her reputation. The same LinkedIn she had used to brag became a graveyard of critical comments. Recruiters distanced themselves. Former colleagues whispered about her arrogance, her downfall becoming a cautionary tale in HR circles across Austin. At home, the silence was worse than shouting. My parents, once so quick to praise her, spoke little. My mother cried behind closed doors. My father muttered about consequences catching up. But neither of them apologized to me. I stopped expecting them to. For me, the aftermath was strangely liberating. With the truth exposed publicly, I no longer carried the burden of invisibility. People began to approach me differently. Neighbors who once ignored me now asked about my service. Friends sent messages of pride. And Jonathan Reyes kept his promise. 2 weeks later, he called. His voice was calm, almost casual. "Hannah, I want you to consider working with us not as an employee, but as a partner. We're building a veterans outreach program at Oracle. You'd be perfect to lead it." I hesitated. "I'm starting nursing school at the University of Texas in Austin this spring. I don't want to lose focus." He chuckled. "Good. Education first. But you can do both. I'll fund your foundation and you can guide us part-time. Think of it as laying the groundwork for something bigger." Something bigger. The words stuck with me. 3 months later, in February, I enrolled in nursing school while also beginning to outline what would become the Mitchell Veterans Care Foundation. The mission was simple but powerful to provide medical support, job training, and community for veterans in Texas. Jonathan connected me with contacts, and Oracle pledged an annual donation. Within weeks, other companies followed. What started as an idea scribbled in a notebook became a reality. Meanwhile, Vicky's life unraveled further. The video haunted her. She applied to dozens of companies, but every interview ended the same way. People had seen the slap. They had seen the CEO's words. Her reputation was toxic. Eventually, she took a low-level HR job at a small firm outside Dallas, far from the spotlight she once craved. She sent me an email once apologizing in stumbling words, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Forgiveness might come one day, but not yet. By Thanksgiving the following year, the world looked entirely different. The Mitchell Veterans Care Foundation officially launched with a ceremony in Austin attended by community leaders, veterans, and even Jonathan Reyes himself. We had already raised millions in commitments enough to fund clinics in Austin and San Antonio. I spoke at the podium, my voice steady as cameras rolled. A year ago, I sat at a Thanksgiving table where I was humiliated and struck. Tonight I stand before you not as a victim, but as a testament to resilience. From humiliation can come rebirth, from cruelty can come purpose, and from quiet strength can come change. The applause rose like thunder. Veterans in the crowd stood saluting. Tears filled my eyes, not from pain, but from pride. At home, Grandma Margaret watched the live stream from her bed, smiling weakly, whispering the words she had told me 100 times, "Quiet strength always wins." Weeks later, she passed peacefully, her hand in mine. At her funeral, I delivered the eulogy speaking of endurance, sacrifice, and love. For once, the family listened without interruption. 18 months after that fateful Thanksgiving, I graduated from nursing school. The foundation had expanded into Dallas and San Antonio. We had helped hundreds of veterans find care jobs and dignity. My days were filled with purpose, my nights with study, my weekends with family that truly mattered the community I had chosen. The scar on my lip had faded, but the memory of that slap never would, and I didn't want it to. It reminded me of the turning point, the moment when everything broke so that something stronger could be built. Vicky sent another message longer this time, admitting jealousy, admitting cruelty, admitting she had lost herself in the chase for status. She asked for forgiveness. I read it, then closed the email. Some bridges, I realized, are not rebuilt. They are meant to burn, lighting the way forward. On the anniversary of the foundation's launch, I visited Grandma's grave, laying fresh flowers. "You were right, Grandma," I whispered. Quiet strength. It wasn't about shouting or fighting. It was about standing tall. And I did. As I stood there, the Texas wind rustling the grass, I felt the weight of everything that had led me here. The humiliation, the slap, the silence, and the justice that followed. They were not curses. They were catalysts. That night, as I looked around at the thriving foundation, at the lives we had touched, at the future, stretching wide before me, I knew this. I was no longer the invisible sister. I was no longer the family's shadow. I was Hannah Mitchell, soldier, nurse, founder, survivor. And sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or violent. It's living so fully, so purposefully, that the ones who tried to break you become nothing more than a footnote in your story. If you've stayed with me through this story, you know this wasn't just about one Thanksgiving gone wrong. It wasn't just about a slap across the face or a cruel sister's words. It was about something deeper, the way humiliation, when endured with quiet strength, can become the very soil where resilience grows. I want to pause here and ask you, the listener, something personal. Have you ever been humiliated by someone who was supposed to love you? Have you ever sat at a table where you were treated as less, where your own family or colleagues or so-called friends tried to make you small? Maybe it wasn't a slap. Maybe it was words that cut sharper than any hand. Maybe it was silence, the kind of silence that says, "You don't matter." If you have, then, you know what I felt that night. And you also know the power of choosing not to break. When I sat at that table with blood on my lip and eyes on me, I thought I was losing everything. My dignity, my place, my voice. What I didn't realize was that the very act of staying steady, of not giving in, of letting the truth speak for itself, was the seed of everything that came later. Without that humiliation, there would have been no foundation, no purpose, no rebirth. And that's the heart of what I want you to take from my story. We cannot control what others do to us. We cannot stop the cruel word, the unfair judgment, or even the hand raised against us. But we can control what we do with it. We can choose to crumble, or we can choose to rise. That choice belongs to us, and no one can take it away. I've told you about my grandmother's words, quiet strength. They may sound simple, almost too simple for a world as loud and cruel as ours. But think about it. Fireworks make noise, but they vanish in seconds. Quiet strength, though, endures. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need recognition. It stands. It waits. It survives long enough for truth to surface. Now, I want to ask you directly because this channel isn't just about me. It's about us. It's about the community we build together, especially for those of us who know what it means to carry scars visible or invisible. Have you ever faced humiliation at a holiday gathering? Have you ever been the one overlooked, dismissed, mocked, or pushed aside when all you wanted was to belong? How did you handle it? Did you speak out? Did you walk away? Did you, like me, sit in silence, bleeding inside but holding steady until the truth came through? Tell me in the comments. Not just for me, but for the thousands of others who will read and realize they are not alone. Your story might be the very thing that gives another person the courage to endure their own moment of humiliation. And let me ask you another question, because this is the part that matters most. What did you build out of your pain? Did you turn humiliation into purpose? Did you use cruelty as a catalyst for something greater? Or are you still waiting for that moment of transformation? If you are still waiting, maybe this is your reminder that it's not too late. You can start today. For me, the slap wasn't the end. It was the beginning. It forced me to step into the light, to accept that my worth was never dependent on my sister's approval or my parents' silence. It was rooted in my service, my sacrifice, my compassion, and my persistence. For you, the catalyst might be different. But the principle remains: the things meant to break us can, if we choose, be the very things that make us. I know many of you watching are in your 50s, 60s, or 70s. You've lived long enough to carry stories of your own, stories of betrayal, of sacrifice, of endurance. I know you've had moments where you were underestimated, moments when you were told you were too old, too weak, too irrelevant. And I know you've had to prove again and again that quiet strength outlasts arrogance. So let me say this to you directly: your story matters. Your dignity matters. Your endurance matters. If this story touched something inside you, if you found yourself nodding, crying, or remembering your own scars, I want to invite you to do 3 things. First, share your story in the comments. Let this be a place where truth isn't hidden but spoken. Second, subscribe to this channel, because the more voices we gather here, the stronger our community becomes. And third, share this video with someone who needs it. Maybe it's a friend who has been silenced, a daughter or son who has endured cruelty, or even a coworker who feels invisible. Sometimes one story is enough to change the way someone sees their own life. Now let's talk about Vicky for just a moment, because I know some of you are wondering what happened to her after the slap, after the investigation, after the firing. You've heard part of it. She lost her job, her reputation, her place in the world she thought she had mastered. But here's the truth: she gave it away. No one forced her to humiliate me. No one made her strike me. She chose cruelty, and cruelty carries consequences. It always does. The question isn't whether consequences arrive, it's when. And when they do, they often come louder than we ever expect. So here's the lesson. If someone in your life is choosing cruelty, let them. Don't waste your strength trying to stop them. Don't waste your breath trying to convince them. Focus instead on standing steady, on holding your ground, on letting truth reveal itself. Because eventually, cruelty writes its own ending. I want to end with one more story, not of humiliation, but of rebirth. 1 year after that Thanksgiving night, I stood at a podium launching the Mitchell Veterans Care Foundation. I looked out at a crowd of veterans, families, and community leaders, and I realized something profound. Every cruel word, every slap, every moment of silence had led me to that stage. Without humiliation, I might never have found my true purpose. Without Vicky's cruelty, I might never have built something greater. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the best thing that could have happened if we choose to use it. So here's my final question for you. What's your foundation? What will you build out of your scars? Maybe it's not a literal organization. Maybe it's reconciliation with a grandchild. Maybe it's the courage to write that book you've been holding inside for decades. Maybe it's volunteering, starting a small business, or simply living with peace and self-respect. Whatever it is, don't let humiliation be the final chapter. Let it be the preface to your rebirth. If you made it this far, thank you. Truly. It means you didn't just consume a story, you lived it with me, felt it with me, and maybe in some way carried part of your own story along the way. Before you go, do 3 things. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Comment with your experience so others can learn from your strength. And share this video with someone who needs to remember that dignity outlasts cruelty. Because in the end, humiliation isn't the end. Quiet strength, truth, and resilience are the real endings. And when we live them out, not only do we survive, we thrive.